So how are we doing today? So I'm going to take a little poll. How many folks in here consider themselves requirement owners or mission owners, vice acquisition people? Just a few? That's unfortunate, not for you guys, but because really acquisition reform, in my opinion, is targeted to the requirement owner, mission operator type community. The acquisition community is generally made up of contracting types, or at least thought to be. And I think that's part of our fundamental problem when we execute acquisitions. See, in my opinion, acquisition reform is not about policy. It's not about regulation. I have been doing this for 25 years, and I've never run into a policy or regulation that prevented me from being able to do an acquisition to support the operator's mission. I might have had to do things differently, but it didn't prevent me from doing that. I think acquisition reform needs to occur more at a tactical level. So I'm going to try and tie in the importance of what General Goring said about mission and requirement within the guidelines of what Mr. Brennan was talking about, and talk about what it really takes to get acquisitions accomplished. Because why are we doing the acquisitions? We're doing them to get the mission done. That's why we're doing the acquisitions. How often do we measure the success of acquisitions by mission metrics? Never. Why is that? That's $164 billion a year we're spending in services, most of which today is helping to employ that pointy end of the spear, and we're not using the mission metrics to measure its success. Seems kind of odd to me. I would also argue that I know that General Goring was kind of separating the difference between the operator and the acquisition community. I would argue that it's all one. Acquisition is not a career field. It's a process. It's a means to an end. It's a way that we choose to get something done in support of a mission because we don't have the in-house resources to do it on our own. And we want to leverage industry because they do have those resources. Acquisition is a team sport. And one of the things I think we fail to do is realize that it's not about contracting. Very vital, important role, believe me. That administrative, legal, contractual arm is what enables the contracts to happen. But I've never had a program fail because I wrote the wrong terms and conditions in a contract. I've had them fail because I either didn't spend enough time in the requirement area, or I wasn't in bed with the requirement owner enough to understand what that requirement was. Or I didn't have some other team member available to me so that when I did post-award execution, I knew we were getting the mission done. So what I'm going to try and do today is talk about three areas that I think we can do in acquisition reform, particularly for services, that don't require Congress, that don't require Ken's team to change policy and regulation, but only requires each and every one of us to think about the acquisition process and how we execute it, and how we can do that on a day-to-day basis to get the mission done, because that's why we're doing it. And amazingly, in the process of doing that, we do some of the things that Ken's looking for. I can take a $100 million program and recompete it and bring it in at $80 million the next time around. And we've done that to the tune of about $500 million a year in many programs. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is how we approach acquisition. And again, General Goring kind of referred to it when he talks about operators over here and the acquisition community over here. And again, like I said, I argue that acquisition is a team sport, and it takes a lot of people to make it work. I think culturally we have given acquisition to the contracting community over the years and felt it was theirs. And I would argue if I have to depend on 60 or 70% of my mission capability to be enabled through acquisition and support from industry, then maybe some of my rated guys need to know about program management and acquisition and be part of that process, because it's enabling capability for me, right? Maybe the logisticians need to do the same thing. Maybe the comm guys need to do the same thing. Maybe we need to start looking at putting together some organizational structures that complement the acquisition process instead of keeping everybody in their stovepipe and keeping our tribal hats on. And I think that's pervasive through all the services. And recognize that because acquisition is a team sport, then maybe I need to put together a permanent team and an organizational structure that complements that acquisition process. And I'll argue for the industry side, that makes it easier and better for us to interact with you because everybody's on the same page. I don't have the lawyers in one room telling me I can't talk to you. I don't have the contracting folks in another room telling me I can't talk to you. And I don't have the requirement guys sitting across the base sneaking you guys in so that you can have conversations about what you want to do in the next requirement. Those kinds of organizational structures don't exist in most of DoD, and I think Ken will attest to that. Usually it's a pure contracting organization, or at best, an organization that has contracting and maybe some engineering in it. Excuse me. But when we talk about operational acquisition and doing missions like flying Predator and Reaper over in the AOR on a daily basis, supported by contracts, or doing war reserve material, resupplying AFCENT, or doing counter narcotics down in the South. Those are day-to-day missions that require that team to be engaged on a day-to-day basis. And you can't do that when they all belong in their own tribes, where they're all sitting in their own tribes. You just cannot execute it. You can't be responsive. Unlike big weapon system acquisition, okay, most of services acquisition happens at the tactical day-to-day mission level. And if I want to be able to provide that capability to the commander, then I got to have a team that is trained, organized, and equipped to do that job. And I think that goes for industry too, because I see the same effects on the industry side. Industry organizational structures tend to be tribal as well. And we tend to, as a community, put the contracting and the acquisition over here, and the finance and that over here, and the legal folks over there. And no acquisition can be successful without all those folks being a part of that single team. So maybe it's time we spend a little time thinking about whether some dedicated organizational structures to acquisition might be appropriate. The next point I want to make is about program management. In the Air Force circles, program management for years and years has been reserved exclusively for the weapon system acquisition side of the house. In fact, DAU primarily was dedicated towards teaching folks to be program managers for weapon system acquisition. Okay. The other program managers that were out there were people that just happened to walk into a job, okay, and be given the title program manager over something. And they went on their business that way. Again, because everybody is part of acquisition, everybody is part of that team, I would argue program management isn't a career field, it's a skill set. And it's a skill set that will do you well whether you're a logistician, a pilot, a comm guy, a lawyer, or just Joe Bag of Donuts on the street. It teaches you some skill sets that help you make better decisions and how to organize and manage the running of a project or a program. Again, if you're going to rely on acquisition to enable your mission capability, then maybe it's smart to send rated guys to program management training. Maybe it's smart to send logisticians to program management training. Because quite frankly, they make better program managers for operational mission sets than somebody who was taught to be a program manager and doesn't have any kind of technical or operational background whatsoever. And it's easier to teach somebody to be a program manager than it is to teach them to be a pilot or a maintainer or a logistician. Bringing program management into services acquisition has been a huge thing. It has brought a lot of capability to what used to be something that was hardly paid attention to. Because services that we did back in our day when you went on a base was grass cutting and laundry services and dining hall. Well, that didn't keep the airplanes from flying every day. Today, that is not the case. The T-38s that you see flying around Langley, all done by contract. Enabling red air, adversary air against the F-22s. Happens every day. If the contracts and the acquisitions and the program manager isn't doing their job, they're not flying. It's that simple. There was a time when 34 of the combat air patrols of the 60 that were provided by the Air Force over in the AOR, 34 of them were done by contract maintainers on the ground, contract weapons loaders, contract launch and recovery. If they weren't doing their job, we weren't fighting the war. So it's important that we put together the right teams and the right capability, and I would argue that program management is every bit as important to services acquisitions and our ability to do the process, interface with industry, and get the mission done, which is why we're doing it in the first place, than it is on buying an F-22 or a tank or a ship. The last point I want to make is about operational community engagement. And again, this gets back to what we were talking about earlier. Okay? If we let contracting own acquisition, they will. And they'll tell you what you can do and what you can't do. And you will get good acquisitions and good contracts, but you may not get the mission done because you may not have been engaged. It's your requirement, it's your acquisition. It's not somebody else's. Okay? When I was in the acquisition center, in that $15 billion portfolio, everybody thought that I owned those contracts. I don't own those contracts. They weren't for me. They weren't doing my mission. My mission was to get those acquisitions to be successful so that I could do the commander's mission. And I need the commander and his team to be engaged in that acquisition and take ownership of that. That's what makes them work. So at the end of the day, acquisition reform to me is not about having somebody in Washington change a policy or regulation. It's about us thinking about what it takes to do acquisition in support of the warfighter so that we can get the job done every day. And I promise you, when you put the right team together in the right organizations with the right training and discipline, you will be able to turn those $100 million contracts into $80 million contracts because you'll be smarter about what you do. The amount we waste just because of miscommunication between the tribes is incredible. The time we lose. You talk about faster, I agree. Faster isn't always better, okay? But faster is achievable because we lose so much time because I don't think we have structures and the right acquisition folks, the right people owning up to being acquisition folks with the right training doing that job, which we today rely so heavily on to get the job done. It's funny, I can go around the directors at Air Combat Command and I can ask each one of them how much they rely on services acquisition support to get their mission done on a day-to-day basis. And almost every one of them will tell me it's 60, 70, 75% of their mission capability today comes directly from service acquisitions that support their missions. That's incredible. But that's something we need to realize as a community. Okay. I only had 20 minutes. I've never talked about this for only 20 minutes, so I'm going to leave the rest of the time for any questions or thoughts or comments that folks may have about that approach. Nobody's got any. Oh, there you go.
Hey, sir. Mike Flanagan, retired Army acquisition guy. Got to ask you, I totally agree about the team sport. What do you think of Army's future command that's standing up next month? Is that the right answer?
It depends on how they organize it. Okay, if they organize it as a pure contracting command, I would say no. It's probably not the right answer because it's not going to be responsive to this guy right here. Okay, I mean, there is value in having acquisition organizations that are embedded with the operational community. Okay, and I think that was one of the keys of why the AMIC there at Langley was able to be so responsive to the ACC missions, is because we were right there and embedded with them, and it worked that way. But I also think, and this gets to what Ken was talking about, so we spent $164 billion in services in DoD, over 14 million transactions. Okay, there's no question there's probably opportunity to cut down on those number of transactions and leverage some buying power, okay? But I think that's going to be limited and constrained by the diversity in the missions that are in DoD, okay? Category management will lump all those things into one category, but what I buy for you and your mission needs is not going to be the same thing I buy for this guy right here, okay? So there's going to have to be a realization and a balance for organizations to do these massive buys that they believe one size will fit all. In commodities, that's more conducive to do, but when you're talking services that support specific mission capabilities, that's not so easy to do. So I'm reluctant to support large acquisition type commands because I don't think they can be responsive. I'm more lean towards a model in the Air Force. I think the MAGCOM level is the highest you can go with an acquisition organization and be responsive to the mission set that MAGCOM is responsible for. I don't think you can put together an organization that can do it all across any service unless you're talking a commodity or something like that, but in the services arena, because I just don't think it can be responsive. Good question. Any others? Okay, super.